A perfect lawn, 100 smiling faces, and a cloud of pink smoke. A gender reveal is supposed to be the happiest day of a couple's life. But for a woman named Sally, that pink smoke felt like a fog of war. In front of her friends, her family, and with a live stream rolling, her husband Liam didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He grabbed the microphone and uttered 6 words that shattered Sally's world and detonated a bomb in the middle of their marriage. Whatever it is, it's not mine. The gasps, the silence, the shame. It was all a blur. But the real story began later that night when a single email with a subject line, "DNA paternity test results," landed in her inbox. What was inside would expose a lie so deep and a betrayal so twisted it would make the public humiliation feel like a paper cut. The sun was impossibly bright on Saturday, June 14th, the kind of brilliant, optimistic light that makes one believe nothing could ever go wrong. The backyard of Sally and Liam's home was a sea of pastel pink and blue. Balloons, streamers, a 3-tiered cake with white frosting and a big question mark on top. They had over 100 people there, friends from college. Liam's colleagues from the architecture firm, Sally's cousins, who drove all the way from Oregon, and their parents beaming with pride. At 7 months pregnant, Sally felt like a queen, presiding over the most joyful celebration of her life. Her hand rested almost permanently on the curve of her stomach, a constant reassuring connection to the little person she already loved more than life itself. Liam, her husband of 5 years, was the perfect host. He moved through the crowd with an easy charm, his arm slung around her shoulders, his laughter echoing across the lawn. He'd kiss her temple and whisper, "You're doing okay, Mama Bear." He was everything a woman could want. Attentive, successful, handsome. They were the perfect couple with the perfect life about to welcome their first child. Or so Sally believed. Looking back, she would realize the signs were there, but they were like whispers in a hurricane, too faint to be heard over the roar of her own happiness. There was the way Liam's sister Chloe would look at Sally when she thought she wasn't being watched, a tight, analytical stare that felt less like sisterly affection and more like an appraisal. There was the way Liam had become slightly distant over the past month, blaming it on a high-stress project at work. "Just got a lot on my mind, babe," he'd say, rolling over to his side of the bed. Sally had accepted it, of course. Marriage was about weathering the small storms. The main event was scheduled for 3 p.m. Their best friends, Mark and Jessica, brought out the giant confetti cannon. Mark, who had been Liam's best man, gave him a playful shove. "Ready to join the dad club, buddy?" Liam smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. A flicker of something cold passed through them so quickly Sally almost missed it. He just nodded and took his place beside his wife. The plan was simple. Mark would count to 3 and they'd pull the cord together. Pink for a girl, blue for a boy. Sally was vibrating with excitement, her heart thudding against her ribs. She squeezed Liam's hand. It was clammy. "I love you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He looked at her, and for a second she saw a stranger. Not her loving husband, but a man made of ice. He said nothing back. One Mark shouted, his voice booming. The crowd chanted along. Sally's mother, Carol, was already dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Liam's mother, Eleanor, stood beside Chloe, her expression uncharacteristically stern. 2. Sally tightened her grip on the cord, her eyes locked on the cannon. She pictured a life with a little girl, teaching her to paint, braiding her hair. She pictured a life with a little boy, watching him play catch with Liam, in this very yard. Either way, it was perfect. 3. They pulled. Boom! A massive explosion of vibrant pink confetti and smoke shot into the sky, shimmering in the afternoon sun. It was a girl. A girl. Tears of pure joy streamed down Sally's face. She turned to Liam, ready to collapse into his arms to share the most magical moment of their lives. But he wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at the sky. He was looking at the crowd, his face a mask of stone. He let go of her hand and stepped away from her. Mark, sensing something was wrong, started to lower the microphone he was holding for speeches. Liam snatched it from his hand. "Liam, what are you doing?" Sally asked, the joy in her chest curdling into confusion. He ignored her. He tapped the microphone. The feedback squealed, silencing the excited chatter of their guests. Every eye was on him. On them. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "It's great to see so many of our friends and family here to celebrate this." He gestured vaguely at Sally and her belly. The air grew thick and heavy. Sally's smile faltered. "I know you're all excited," he continued, his voice getting louder, harder. "A little girl. Sally always wanted a girl." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. He looked directly at Sally's parents, then at his own mother. Then he turned his gaze on his wife. It was filled with a contempt so profound it physically hurt her. "But I want to make one thing perfectly, publicly clear." He raised the microphone to his lips, his knuckles white. The world seemed to slow down. Sally could see every shocked face, every confused glance. She could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. "Whatever it is," he said, his voice ringing out with chilling finality, "it's not mine." The gasp from the crowd was a physical force, sucking the air from Sally's lungs. A profound, echoing silence followed, broken only by a single horrified sob from her mother. Sally's legs gave out. She stumbled backward, catching herself on the gift table, sending a pile of neatly wrapped presents crashing to the ground. The world swam in a nauseating blur of pink confetti and horrified faces. Chloe, Liam's sister, was the first to move. She rushed to his side, but not to stop him. She put a protective hand on his arm, as if he were the victim. Liam's mother, Eleanor, stared straight ahead. Her face an unreadable granite slab. Sally's own father, David, looked like he was about to commit murder. He started toward Liam, but his wife held him back, her face a mess of tears. The guests stood frozen, a tableau of shock and discomfort. Some people started backing away slowly, pretending to take a phone call. Others just stared, their mouths agape. Sally's carefully constructed perfect life had just been demolished by a public execution, and she was the one left bleeding on the stage. Liam dropped the microphone. It hit the grass with a dull thud. He didn't look at Sally again. He just turned, and with Chloe as his escort, he walked through the stunned crowd, got into his car, and drove away, leaving his pregnant wife alone, humiliated, and surrounded by the pink, festive ruins of her life. The silence Liam left in his wake was more deafening than any explosion. For a full minute, nobody moved. They just stared at Sally. The woman scorned the centerpiece of a drama they would be talking about for years. Her best friend Jessica was the one who broke the spell. She rushed to Sally's side, her face a furious storm cloud. "Sally, oh my God. Sally, are you okay?" She wrapped her arms around her friend, and only then did Sally realize she was shaking uncontrollably, her whole body racked with tremors. Her father David, a man she had rarely seen angry, finally broke free from her mother's grasp. That coward! That absolute son of a bitch! He roared, his voice cracking with rage. The party was over. People fled as if the house was on fire. They offered hushed, awkward condolences as they scurried away, their eyes darting everywhere but at Sally. Each averted glance felt like a fresh stab of shame. They were leaving with the story of a lifetime, and she was left to live in the wreckage. Mark Liam's supposed best friend stood uselessly by the confetti cannon, his face pale with shock. I don't understand, he stammered, looking at Sally. He wouldn't. Sally. I'm so sorry. Sally's parents and Jessica formed a protective circle around her, shielding her from the pitying stares. They guided her back into the house, away from the mocking pink confetti that now littered the lawn, like evidence from a crime scene. Inside, Sally collapsed onto the sofa. The tremors wouldn't stop. Her mind was a frantic, chaotic mess trying to process what had just happened. Liam's words echoed and re-echoed in her head. It's not mine. It's not mine. How could he? How could he believe that they had been trying for a baby for over a year? It was all they talked about, all they wanted. This child was conceived from love, from intimacy, from the promises they'd made to each other. Had it all been a lie? Honey, what happened? Her mother. Carol asked, her voice gentle as she knelt before her. Did you two have a fight? Sally shook her head, unable to speak. A fight is something you recover from. This was an annihilation. There was no fight. She finally choked out the words, tasting like ash. Everything was perfect this morning. He was kissing me, calling me Mama Bear. Her voice broke, and a wave of guttural sobs ripped through her. It was the sound of a heart breaking. Jessica was on the phone, her voice low and venomous. Sally could only assume she was leaving Liam a voicemail that would peel the paint off his car. Her dad paced the living room like a caged lion. An hour later, the house was quiet, except for Sally's weeping. Her parents had cleaned up the backyard, refusing to let her see the remnants of her own humiliation. Jessica had made tea that Sally couldn't drink. That's when she remembered. The DNA test. About a month ago, Liam had come to her with a strange request. He'd been reading about new non-invasive prenatal paternity tests. It's amazing, Sally, he'd said, showing her a website on his tablet. They just take a blood sample from you and a cheek swab from me. It's 99% accurate. It's just for peace of mind, you know, a formality, so we can have this official document for the baby book. His reasoning felt flimsy, but she was so wrapped up in the joy of the pregnancy that she dismissed her unease. She thought it was just another of his meticulous architectural quirks, needing every blueprint to be perfect, every variable accounted for. She'd agreed without a fight. They went to a private lab, gave their samples, and were told the results would be emailed to them in 4 to 6 weeks. The due date for the results was this week. He must have gotten them. He must have seen them and decided to believe a lab report over the 5 years they had shared. But why? Her entire being screamed that it was impossible. She had never been with another man. Not even close. Her life revolved around her work as a graphic designer, her home, and Liam. There was no other man. There was no possibility. The test. Sally whispered, her eyes widening. Jessica stopped her pacing. What test? We did a DNA test, a prenatal one, Liam insisted. Her dad stopped, his eyes locking on hers. Why on earth would he do that? He said it was a formality. For the baby book. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think. She trailed off, the full horror of the situation dawning on her. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment psychotic break. This was premeditated. He had planned this. He had waited for the most public, most celebratory moment possible to inflict the maximum amount of pain. A new kind of anger, cold and sharp, began to cut through the grief. Sally scrambled for her laptop. Her hands were still shaking so badly she could barely type her password. She logged into her email account, her heart pounding a sick, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She searched the inbox for the name of the lab, Veritas Genetics. Nothing. She checked the spam folder. Nothing. He must have used his email, she said, her voice flat. He registered it. The results would have gone to him, and then, as if summoned by the devil himself, a notification popped up on her screen. It was an email forward. From Liam. Donovan@archsolutions.com. To Sally. Donovan@email.com. Subject FWD, your paternity test results. Case PNTL 88721. There was no text from him. No explanation. Just the forwarded email from Veritas Genetics. Sally's blood ran cold. This was it. The verdict. Jessica and her parents gathered behind her, their collective breath held. Sally felt like she was on death row, waiting for the governor's call. Her entire life, her identity as a wife and a mother, hinged on what was inside this email. With a trembling finger, she clicked it open. The email was sterile and clinical. A wall of text and a link to a secure PDF. Dear Mr. Donovan and Ms. Miller. It used her maiden name Miller for the report, which felt like another slap. Please find the attached report for your recent non-invasive prenatal DNA paternity test. The results are based on the analysis of the provided buccal swab sample from the alleged father, Liam Donovan, and the blood sample from the mother, Sally Miller. Her hand hovered over the link to the PDF. For a fleeting second, she considered not opening it. She could delete it, pretend it never existed, and live in the blissful ignorance of her own truth. But it was too late for that. The bomb had already gone off. This was just the fallout report. She clicked. The document loaded a simple one-page report. It was mostly scientific jargon, confidence intervals, and allele markers. But at the bottom, in a bold, impossible-to-misread font, was the conclusion. Analysis conclusion. The probability of paternity for the alleged father Liam Donovan with the fetus is... Her eyes scanned the final soul-destroying number. 0%. A 0. Not 99.9%. Not an inconclusive result. A perfect, absolute, undeniable 0. Based on the DNA samples provided, Liam Donovan was not the father of her child. Sally thought she screamed, but she wasn't sure. The world dissolved into a tunnel of black. The last thing she heard was her mother's voice, sharp with panic, as her head rushed towards the floor. The screen with its damning verdict glowed in the darkness behind her eyelids. The number 0 burned there, a brand mark on her soul. Liam wasn't just cruel. He wasn't just paranoid. According to the laws of science, he was right. And her entire world, everything she thought was true, was a catastrophic lie. Sally came to on the sofa, the sharp, medicinal scent of smelling salts stinging her nostrils. Jessica was hovering over her, her face etched with a fear Sally had never seen before. Her dad was on the phone, his voice a low, urgent rumble. Her mom was pressing a cold cloth to her forehead. "The email," Sally croaked, her throat raw. "Did you see it?" Jessica's expression was a painful mix of pity and confusion. "We saw it, honey. It's a mistake. It has to be." But the certainty in the report that cold, hard zero felt anything but mistaken. It felt like a mathematical proof that she was either a liar or she was insane. And since Sally knew in her heart she wasn't a liar, she was starting to question her own sanity. The days that followed were a blur of shame and suffocating grief. Her parents stayed with her, treating her like a fragile piece of glass. Her dad handled everything. He called Liam's office and was told Mr. Donovan had taken an indefinite leave of absence. He called Liam's cell, which went straight to a new voicemail message. The voice cold and unfamiliar. "You have reached Liam Donovan. I am not taking calls. If this is Sally, all communication must go through my lawyer." His lawyer. 5 days ago, they were picking out names for their daughter, and now they needed lawyers to speak to each other. The news, of course, had spread like wildfire through their social circle. Sally's phone was a minefield of texts. Some were supportive, from friends like Jessica, who refused to believe it. Others were full of veiled questions and morbid curiosity. Sally couldn't bear to look at any of them. She deactivated her Facebook and Instagram, unable to face the digital ghosts of her happy life, the engagement photos, the wedding album, the smiling pregnancy announcement from just a few months ago. Each picture was a testament to a life that had been a lie. Chloe Liam's sister had blocked her number. His mother. Eleanor sent Sally's mother a single frosty text. "We are supporting our son through this difficult and humiliating time. We trust you will respect our family's privacy." Their son's difficult time. Their privacy. Sally was the one whose life had been publicly dismantled. The injustice of it was a poison seeping into the love she had for her unborn child. She'd look at her belly in the mirror, and instead of feeling love, she'd feel a wave of confusion and fear. Who was this little person inside her if not a product of her love for Liam? It's the lab, her father insisted every day. They mixed up the samples. That's the only explanation. "We'll sue them into the ground, Sally." They called Veritas Genetics. They were met with a corporate wall of calm, unshakable confidence. A supervisor named Ms. Albright explained their protocol in a droning, dispassionate voice. "Our chain of custody is unbroken and digitally tracked from the moment of collection to the moment of analysis. Every sample is barcoded twice. The analysis is run by 2 separate teams on 2 separate machines. The possibility of a sample mix-up is, statistically speaking, less than 1 in 10 million. 1 in 10 million. It was more likely she'd be struck by lightning." Sally's mind began to spiral, replaying every moment of the last year, searching for a gap, a black hole where a memory was supposed to be. Had she ever drunk too much? There was a New Year's Eve party 9 months ago. They'd all had champagne. But she came home with Liam. She went to bed with Liam. There was a work conference in Seattle in January. She'd had wine with colleagues at a dinner. Did she black out? Did something happen that she couldn't remember? The thought was so vile, so contrary to her entire character, that it made her physically ill. She was a woman who cherished her marriage. The idea of betraying Liam, even in a forgotten, drunken haze, was unthinkable. Yet the 0 on that page forced her to think it. She spent hours staring at a calendar, trying to align the date of conception with her memories. The doctors had given them a window a week in late December. They'd been at a cozy cabin in the mountains for their anniversary. It had been romantic, intimate, and perfect. It was the week their daughter was conceived. They were completely alone. Unless the impossible was true. Unless she had a secret life she didn't even know she was living. She felt like she was losing her mind. Jessica was her rock. She came over every day armed with ice cream and a refusal to give up. "Okay," she said one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, a notepad in her hand. "Let's be detectives. We're not questioning if you were faithful. We know you were. We are questioning the evidence. The evidence is the DNA test. How could the evidence be wrong?" "The lab says it can't be," Sally mumbled, pulling a blanket tighter around her. "Forget the lab. Let's talk about the samples," Jessica said, her eyes bright with purpose. "They took your blood and Liam's cheek swab. Your blood is your blood. That can't be faked. But the swab, who handled the swab?" "Sally." Sally thought back to that day at the clinic. It was a small boutique place. A nurse had called them in. She drew Sally's blood herself. Then she handed Liam the sealed kit with the swab. She gave it to him. Sally said, her voice barely a whisper. He went to the men's room to do it. He said he wanted to rinse his mouth out first to make sure it was a clean sample. Jessica's pen stopped moving. She looked up at Sally, her eyes wide. "He went into a room alone with the swab?" she asked. A jolt went through Sally. "Yes." "He was in there for maybe 5 minutes. He came out, sealed the sample bag in front of me, and we handed it to the nurse together." 5 minutes is a long time, Sally." "What are you suggesting?" Sally asked, though a sick feeling was already churning in her stomach. "That he—" "What?" "That he faked the swab. If you were Liam and you were 100% convinced this baby wasn't yours, but you had no proof, how would you get it? You couldn't fake a paternity test to say you are the father, but you could absolutely fake one to say you aren't. It was a monstrous thought. That Liam, her Liam, could be so cunning, so diabolically cruel. But the man who had stood up at that party was a stranger to her. That man was capable of anything. Who would he get to swab their cheek for him? Sally asked, her mind racing. It would have to be someone he trusts implicitly. Someone who would go along with such a crazy, destructive plan. Jessica and Sally looked at each other, and the same 2 names appeared in their minds at the exact same moment. Mark and Chloe. Mark was his best friend, his brother in all but blood. But Mark loved Sally too as a friend. He was a pillar of their shared life. He would never— would he? He looked so genuinely shocked at the party. And then there was Chloe, Liam's viper of a sister. She had always treated their marriage like a hostile takeover of her brother. She was protective to the point of obsession. She had the motive to get Sally out of Liam's life for good. And she had the ruthlessness. But would Liam involve his own sister in a lie of this magnitude? "There's one other person," Jessica said softly. "The one person Liam has been leaning on this whole time. The one person who was right there by his side when he made that announcement. Chloe. How do we prove it?" Sally asked, a spark of fight returning to her soul for the first time in weeks. "We need Chloe's DNA," Jessica said, her expression grim. "And we need to compare it to the sample on file at Veritas." It was an impossible task. They couldn't just walk up to her and ask for a cheek swab. They couldn't legally subpoena the lab's records without a court case that would take months and expose Sally to even more public scrutiny. They were stuck. They had a theory, a wild conspiratorial theory that painted her husband as a Machiavellian monster, but they had no way of proving it. All Sally had was the official report that declared her an adulterer and her daughter a bastard. That night, unable to sleep, Sally found herself in the nursery they had so lovingly prepared. The walls were a soft lavender. A white crib stood assembled in the corner. Tiny dresses hung in the closet. Her hand rested on her belly, and she felt a faint kick, a little flutter of life. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of anger and determination. Someone was lying. Someone had orchestrated the destruction of her life. It was either her in some fugue state she couldn't recall, or it was the man she had promised to love for eternity. And for the sake of the innocent child inside her, Sally was going to find out who. She was going to unearth the anatomy of this lie, no matter what it cost her. She was no longer just a victim. She was a mother, fighting for her child's truth. The theory that Liam had faked the DNA test was a double-edged sword for Sally. On one hand, it offered a sliver of hope, a rational explanation that could restore her sanity. On the other, it painted a portrait of her husband, so monstrous it was hard to comprehend. Could the man who held her hand through her father's heart, surgery, and cried with joy when they first saw a heartbeat on the ultrasound be capable of such cold, calculated cruelty? Her mission became singular. She needed to understand why. Even if he had faked the test, what had planted the seed of doubt in the first place? Men don't orchestrate conspiracies like this out of nowhere. Something or someone had to have convinced him she was unfaithful. Her first thought was to confront Mark. As Liam's best friend, he was the most likely person to know what was going on in Liam's head. She invited him over for coffee, a meeting that felt profoundly awkward. He sat stiffly on the edge of the armchair that Liam used to occupy, refusing to make eye contact. "Mark, I need you to be honest with me." Sally began, her voice steady. "What has Liam been saying? Why would he do this?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sally, I swear to you I'm as lost as you are. He cut me off, too. The day after the party, he sent me a text, said he needed space from everyone who was on your side. But before that, in the weeks leading up to it, did he seem off? Did he mention any doubts about the baby?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation Sally knew there was something. "Mark. Please. About a month and a half ago. We were having a beer," he said, slowly, choosing his words with care. He was quiet. I asked him what was wrong, and he just said he had this gut feeling that something was wrong. He was being really cryptic. I asked if it was about you, and he got defensive. He said his sister Chloe had been pointing some things out to him. Chloe. Of course. She was the ghost in the machine, the puppet master pulling the strings. What things Sally pressed. What did she point out? He wouldn't say exactly. Mark said, finally looking at her, his eyes full of apology. He just said she opened his eyes to some stuff. He clammed up after that. The next thing I knew, he was telling me he'd ordered a DNA test, just to be sure. I told him he was being crazy, that you would never... But he wouldn't listen. He said he was just ruling it out for his own peace of mind. so Chloe had been dripping poison in his ear for months. But what poison? What possible evidence could she have invented? Sally's life was an open book. After Mark left, Sally felt a new surge of focus. If Chloe was the source she needed to know her angle, she couldn't confront her directly, so she had to think laterally. Her mind went to the one person who might have insight into the dynamics of that family. Someone who was close enough to see the cracks, but not loyal enough to protect its secrets. Eleanor's former housekeeper. Brenda had worked for Liam's parents for over 20 years before retiring. She had known Liam and Chloe since they were children and had always been kind to Sally. It was a long shot, but she was desperate. Sally found her number and gave her a call. "Sally, dear." I was so horrified to hear Brenda, said her voice warm and grandmotherly. "That boy has lost his mind. I never thought he had that kind of cruelty in him." "Brenda." "I have a strange question," Sally said, pacing her kitchen. "You know Chloe better than almost anyone. Has she ever disliked me?" Brenda let out a short, bitter laugh. "Oh, honey, Chloe has disliked every woman Liam has ever brought home. No one was ever good enough for her brother. But with you, it was different. It was worse. Worse how she was jealous," Brenda said plainly. "Not just of his attention. She was jealous of your life, of your happiness. But there was something else, too. A secret she was terrified would come out." Sally's heart started to pound. "What secret? I shouldn't be telling you this." Brenda said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But Eleanor let it slip once years ago, after a few too many glasses of Chardonnay. "It's about Chloe's son, Leo." Chloe had a 10-year-old son, Leo. Her husband had left her when Leo was a baby. She always painted herself as the tragic single mother, a narrative that engendered a lot of sympathy, especially from Liam. "What about him?" Sally asked. "Leo's father." "It wasn't her ex-husband," Brenda said. "Chloe had an affair, a very brief one. Her husband found out, and that's why he left. He knew Leo wasn't his. The whole family knows. They all agreed to keep the secret to protect the family name and to protect Leo. Liam practically worships that boy." A puzzle piece clicked into place in Sally's mind. Chloe, the guardian of a massive family secret about paternity, was accusing her of the very same thing. It was projection, a way to deflect from her own past by manufacturing a crisis in Sally's. But it still didn't explain what proof she could have possibly presented to Liam. That night, Sally did something she wasn't proud of. She logged into Liam's cloud account. They shared a family plan, and she still had the password. She felt sleazy and invasive, but she was past the point of caring about propriety. She was fighting for her life. She sifted through photo backups, documents, and files. Nothing. It was all project blueprints and vacation photos. She was about to give up when she checked the search history on his web browser, which was synced to the cloud. She scrolled back for months. It was mostly architectural websites, news articles, and sports scores. And then she saw it. From 6 weeks ago. A series of frantic late-night searches. How to get a friend's DNA without them knowing. Submitting someone else's DNA for paternity test. Can you use a sibling's DNA for a paternity test? Sally's blood turned to ice. He hadn't used Mark's DNA. He had considered using Chloe's. The search history was the proof. He had conspired with his sister to fake the results. The swab he submitted to Veritas Genetics hadn't been his. It had been from another man, a stranger, or perhaps someone Chloe knew, ensuring the result would be 0%. It was a deliberate, calculated frame job. But the final piece of the puzzle, the why, was still missing. Why did he believe Chloe's lies so readily? Why was he so insecure that he would rather believe in a conspiracy against him than in his own wife's fidelity? She kept digging, going deeper into the cloud, back up this time into a folder labeled medical. It was mostly old insurance forms and dental records, but there was one file she didn't recognize. It was a scanned document from a urology clinic. It was dated 3 years ago, before they had even started trying for a baby. The file name was simple: Semen Analysis L. Donovan.pdf. Her hand was shaking so violently she could barely control the mouse. She clicked on it. It was a lab report full of medical data. She scanned past the charts and the numbers, her eyes searching for the summary. The conclusion. She found it at the bottom of the page. A single clinical devastating sentence. Diagnosis: azoospermia. 0 sperm count detected. The room began to spin. Azoospermia. 0 sperm count. Sterile. Liam was sterile. He had known for 3 years that he could not have biological children. The breath left Sally's body in a silent scream. It all crashed down on her at once with the force of a tidal wave. He didn't suspect the baby wasn't his. He knew the baby wasn't his. He had always known from the moment she told him she was pregnant. His joy, his excitement, his hand on her belly. The nursery they built together, it was all a performance, a lie. He had been playing the part of the happy father-to-be, while secretly knowing it was biologically impossible. The DNA test wasn't to see if she had cheated. It was his weapon, his way of proving to the world what he already knew in a way that would utterly destroy her. He hadn't faked the test because he was insecure. He had faked it because he needed a third party, a scientific authority, to validate his own secret and expose her betrayal. Chloe hadn't been dripping poison in Liam's ear. She was his co-conspirator in a plot to punish the woman who had unknowingly exposed his deepest shame. But that led to the final terrifying question that now eclipsed everything else. If Liam was sterile, then whose baby was she carrying? The calendar, the timeline, the cabin in the mountains. It was all meaningless. Sally hadn't cheated. She knew that in her bones. So how was she pregnant? A memory surfaced in her mind. A memory she had buried not out of guilt, but because it was so deeply uncomfortable. It was from about 10 months ago. Liam had been away on a week-long business trip. Sally had been lonely and sad. Mark had come over to keep her company. His own long-term relationship had just ended badly, and he was a wreck. They sat in the living room sharing a bottle of wine. They talked for hours, crying on each other's shoulders, two lonely souls mourning different kinds of loss. They drank too much. Sally remembered him helping her up the stairs. She remembered him tucking her into bed. She remembered a hug that lasted a little too long. It was fraught with emotion, with a strange, desperate comfort. But that was it. Nothing else happened. She was sure of it. Wasn't she? The haze of the wine, the emotional vulnerability, the shared sadness, a cold, horrifying dread began to seep into her veins. Could a moment of shared grief and a drunken haze have blurred a line she never thought could be crossed, a line she didn't even remember approaching? There was only one man who had been close enough, who had the opportunity, and who at that exact moment was just as broken as she was. Mark, Liam's best friend. Their best friend. The father of her baby wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a one-night stand. He was the man who had stood by the confetti cannon, his face the picture of shock. The man who had just been in her house, pledging his support. The 0 on Liam's test wasn't the biggest lie. The biggest lie was sitting right in front of her the whole time, hidden behind a face she trusted. The revelation of Liam's sterility was a tectonic shift. It recontextualized his cruelty. But more importantly, it opened a terrifying new chasm in Sally's reality. If Liam was sterile, he didn't just think the baby wasn't his. He knew it was impossible. The entire performance of a happy father-to-be was a lie designed to conceal his own secret while plotting her ruin. This chilling thought was immediately eclipsed by a far more urgent and horrifying question. If not Liam, then who? Her mind frantically raced backward through time, searching for an answer. Any answer that didn't involve a betrayal. Her life was an open book, her fidelity absolute. It made no sense. And then a memory surfaced from the depths, one she had buried not out of guilt, but out of a vague, unsettling discomfort. It was from nearly a year ago. Liam had been away on a week-long business trip. Mark, whose own long-term relationship had just ended in ruins, had come over to keep her company. They had shared a bottle of wine, two lonely souls mourning different kinds of loss. The evening grew hazy with alcohol and shared grief. She remembered crying, and she remembered Mark hugging her, a hug that felt fraught with a desperate, unspoken emotion. After that, her memory was a wall, a black space. Could a moment of shared sorrow have blurred a line she never thought could be crossed? The dread that seeped into her veins was cold and absolute. There was only one man who had been close enough, who had the opportunity, and who at that exact moment was just as broken as she was. Mark. Liam's best friend. Their friend. She knew she couldn't live another second with the uncertainty. A single urgent phone call brought him to her door within 15 minutes, his face etched with a concern that now seemed grotesque. Sally led him into the living room, the same room where they had shared that fateful bottle of wine. She didn't offer him a seat. She stood before him, her arms wrapped around her belly, as if to shield her daughter from the truth that was about to detonate. "I know why Liam did what he did," she began, her voice shaking but firm. "I found his medical records. He's sterile, Mark. He has known for 3 years that he can't have children." Mark's face went white, his shock appearing genuine. "What, Sally? That's impossible. It's monstrous." "Yes, it is," she said, her gaze unwavering, refusing to be swayed by another performance. "But that's not why you're here. His sterility proves that he isn't the father. Which leaves a question I need you to answer." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. "I need you to tell me about the night Liam was in Denver." He flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible reaction that told her everything. He knew exactly the night she meant. "We were both a mess," she pressed on, her voice cracking. "We drank too much. I remember you helping me upstairs. And then, I don't remember. Mark, I am begging you. Do not lie to me. Not now. Tell me what happened." Her voice dropped to a whisper, heavy with the weight of the question she could barely bring herself to ask. "Is this baby yours?" He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The friendly, supportive mask he had worn for months shattered, revealing the terrified, guilty man beneath. In the horrifying silence, she saw the truth in his eyes, long before his body began to shake. A choked sob finally escaped his lips, and he collapsed into an armchair, burying his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Sally." He wept, his voice thick with a self-loathing that was palpable. "Oh God, I am so sorry." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. It was true. The final ugliest piece of the puzzle clicked into place. How was the only word she could manage? He looked up, his face a mess of tears and shame. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was a mistake. We were just comforting each other. The hug. It just became something else. One moment. One terrible, regrettable moment of weakness and loneliness. We woke up the next morning, and the shame was so immense we couldn't even speak about it. We just buried it, pretended it was a drunken nightmare. He explained how he'd felt a spike of terror when she announced her pregnancy, but had pushed it down, choosing to believe the easier truth. He'd celebrated with them the guilt, a cancer eating him from the inside. Liam's announcement at the party had been a dual shock horror for her and sheer panic for himself. The betrayal was a vortex pulling her down. Betrayed by her husband's malice, his sister's conspiracy, and now by her best friend's cowardice. "You stood by and watched me crumble," she said, her voice dangerously low and full of a gathering rage. "You let me think I was losing my mind. You comforted me knowing you were the source of it all. You stood on that lawn and watched my husband publicly brand me an adulteress for something you did. I know he whispered a broken man. I was a coward. I was so scared. Scared." The word ignited her fury. She pointed a trembling finger toward the door. "Get out! Sally, please! Get out!" she screamed, the sound ripping from her throat, raw and cleansing. "Get out of my house! Don't you ever speak to me again!" He stumbled to his feet, gave her one last pleading look she refused to acknowledge, and fled. Sally was left alone once more, the silence of the house pressing in on her. But this time she was not in a fog of confusion. She was standing in the harsh, ugly glare of the complete truth. The hours after Mark's confession were not filled with grief, but with a cold, hard resolve. The mystery was solved, and all that remained was the reckoning. Sally's support system, her parents and Jessica, became her war council, their quiet fury bolstering her own. Armed with every piece of the truth, she sent a single text to Liam, Chloe, and their mother, Eleanor's house. "Sunday at noon. Be there. All of you. It's time we finished this." She knew their arrogance wouldn't let them refuse. On Sunday, Sally walked into Eleanor's formal living room, with Jessica, a silent, formidable presence, just behind her. The three of them were waiting as she expected, Liam looking haunted, Chloe defiant on an armchair, and Eleanor the matriarch presiding from the sofa with a face like cement. Sally Eleanor began, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm not sure what the purpose of this little gathering is. As far as we're concerned, the matter is settled." A short, humorless laugh escaped Sally's lips. "Oh, Eleanor, we are just getting started." Her gaze settled on Liam, who refused to meet her eyes. "Look at me, Liam," she commanded, her voice clear and cold as ice. He flinched and slowly raised his head. "You crucified me based on a DNA test that said your probability of being the father was 0. Sally stated, pacing slowly into the room's center. "And you were right. The probability is 0. Chloe smirked. "So you admit it. We're glad you've finally come to terms with your indiscretion." "My indiscretion," Sally shot back, turning her full attention on Chloe. That's a bold word from a woman who has been lying to her own son his entire life about who his real father is. The color drained from Chloe's face. Eleanor gasped. How dare you? Chloe stammered, her composure shattering. Brenda sends her regards, Sally said coolly. Funny how secrets get out when you start blowing up other people's lives. She didn't wait for a response, turning back to her hollowed-out husband. But you didn't need Chloe's lies or a faked test to convince you, did you, Liam? You've always known you couldn't be the father. She pulled a folded paper from her purse. I found this, your lab report from 3 years ago. The diagnosis was azoospermia, a 0 sperm count. You're sterile, Liam. The medical term landed in the silent room like a grenade. Eleanor stared at her son, her face a mask of horror. Liam finally broke, slumping in his chair. It's true, he whispered the confession, barely audible. I was ashamed. You were more than ashamed. You were a coward. And then you were cruel. Sally said, her voice rising with righteous anger. When I became pregnant, you didn't see a miracle. You saw a betrayal. So you and your sister hatched a disgusting plan to not just divorce me, but to obliterate me. You wanted to punish me for my infidelity. But more than that, you wanted to punish me for having a child when you could not. Her gaze fell on the matriarch. And you, Eleanor. You enabled him. You spoke of privacy while your son was committing an act of profound psychological violence. You chose his lie over my truth without a moment's hesitation. She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the space between them. You were all so obsessed with who the father was. So, I'll tell you. The father is Mark. Liam's head shot up, his defeated expression twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The irony was suffocating. Mark. He hissed the name like poison. Yes, Mark. Sally confirmed, her voice steady. In a moment of weakness and drunken misery for us both. A terrible mistake that he at least had the courage to confess to my face. Unlike you, who would have carried your malicious lies to the grave. She stood there, in the center of their self-inflicted ruin, feeling nothing but the cold finality of an ending. The love was dead. This is the world you created, she said quietly. You didn't just end a marriage. You destroyed a lifelong friendship and fractured your own family, all because one man's ego was more fragile than his wife's heart. With that, she turned and walked toward the door. She stopped at the threshold, looking back at the three of them one last time. My lawyer will be in contact. I want nothing from you but a divorce, Liam. The house is in my name. Don't ever contact me or my daughter again. Her eyes swept over all of them. Any of you. Sally walked out of that house and didn't look back. It was only when she was safely in the car with her family that she finally let herself cry. They were not the tears of a victim, but of a warrior. The war was over. The truth was out. And she was free. In the end, the pink confetti was swept away. The lies were exposed, and the people who tried to break Sally were left shattered in their own self-made prison of deceit. Her daughter Lily was born 3 months later, healthy and beautiful. She has her mother's eyes and a strength that comes from the fire they walked through together. Sally's relationship with Mark is complicated. It's not a romance, but a fragile, carefully managed co-parenting agreement, built on honesty and a shared love for their child. He is working every single day, to earn a sliver of the trust he obliterated. Sally lost a husband and a life she thought she wanted, but she found something far more valuable herself. She discovered a resilience she never knew she possessed, and a fierce, unconditional love for her daughter that has become the unshakable foundation of her new life. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the incredible power of truth, the courage it takes to fight for it, and the peace you can find when you walk away from the toxicity and choose to build your own happiness from the ground up. If Sally's story has moved you or resonated with you in any way, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of survival and strength. What would you have done in Sally's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.